Hey, welcome in.
Welcome to the Arrowhead Addict podcast.
We are here coming to you live. The Kansas City Chiefs are going to the Super Bowl. You only win a Super Bowl 2 times every 5 years, right? Oh! The warm-up act is over. Let's bring in Melissa Etheridge, massive Chiefs fan. Melissa.
Super Bowl champion, 2-time Pro Bowler, and Trent Green. Trent Green, how you doing?
Hey, what's going on, guys?
Anybody? He picked it up! He picked it up! He's gonna score! And we'll see you next week, but until then, as always, go Chiefs.
Welcome into a live Red Friday edition of the Intangibles. My name is Price Carter. Thank you for joining me. I usually have my excellent co-host Christian Ainsworth with me, but he is not here today. He has a case of the stomach bug, which those of you who have been teachers before or are teachers or are parents, you know that is going around right now. So T's and P's to him, hoping that he's doing well. So it's just going to be me. We thought it wouldn't be very cool for him to have to run off the screen to the bathroom. So just going to be me today. And you know what? I called it a Red Friday. And the Chiefs don't play a game on this Sunday, but when it's the freaking Super Bowl that your team is getting ready to play in again, 3 straight years again, you get to call it Red Friday. So I've got my red on. Hopefully you've got some red on. And today, you know what? I can't stop myself. I have been wanting to talk about this matchup with the Eagles. When you win the AFC Championship game, it feels like you almost have to kind of hold yourself back a little bit. You want to soak in the juiciness, the glory that is winning the AFC Championship, especially against a really good quarterback and a really good team like the Buffalo Bills. But at some point, you got to start looking ahead to the Super Bowl. So today we're going to do just that. Next week is going to be a very different week for us here on the show, as we have guys boots on the ground, as they say, in New Orleans. We'll have our very own Sterling Holmes and Patrick Allen down at Radio Row, covering everything, paired with the Special Olympics. They're going to be doing some great work down there on Radio Row, collecting live recordings and live episodes of the podcast down there with guys like Will Shields. We just posted an interview with Rob Gronkowski, the 3rd greatest tight end in NFL history. We obviously know who 2 is. That would be Tony Gonzalez, and number 1 would be Travis Kelce. But make sure you got notifications turned on, and make sure you subscribe to the Arrowhead Addict channel. We are so close to having 55,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel. This would be a great time for you to subscribe if you've not, because you're going to get notifications when we go live, when we have interviews with former Chiefs, with other great NFL players on Radio Row. Oh, and also, by the way, our guys are going to the live event Monday at the stadium to see all the Chiefs players on opening night of the Super Bowl. There's not a lot of places to have that opportunity. So we want to give you that content. We want to get it to you as quickly as possible. Obviously, we'll have lots of great written stuff on the site as well. So make sure you're locked in here on Arrowhead Addict as we roll up to the Super Bowl. I tell you what, back in 2019, when the Chiefs made the Super Bowl for the very first time, everything felt like a monumental occasion, right? Like I remember seeing that Super Bowl patch on the Chiefs jersey for the first time. And I swear I watched that video like 50 times. And, seeing the Chiefs leave and arrive at the Super Bowl location where they fly the flag out the plane, every little thing about the Super Bowl, it never gets old. Media night never gets old. I'm still going to watch it and still listen to the kids ask those cringy questions, and everyone will ask the guys the same couple of questions over and over again, but I never get tired of it, and you shouldn't either. So make sure to soak up all this Super Bowl content as we go through it, because guys, you just don't know how many days it's going to be around. Right now, if I told you that it's not going to be around much longer, you probably wouldn't believe me, because the proof is that it has been. But one of these days it won't be like this. So do soak it up and do enjoy it. So today here on the podcast, we're going to be doing a little pregame. We're going to do a little game preview of this. I've pulled some stats, looked at some metrics. We want to talk about this matchup with the Eagles, and we're going to start to break down the details. I feel like we're far enough away from the AFC Championship game that we can really start digging into this matchup, because this is a tough game the Chiefs have ahead of them. And so much of this has been talked about How is this game going to break down? Talking about the 3P, it feels like we've almost kind of forgotten to talk about there's a really good football team waiting for the Chiefs in New Orleans, and we're going to break everything down with that. And then at the end here, I kind of wanted to talk a little about some guys who have been keeping an eye on at the Shrine Bowl, at the Senior Bowl, which is going to be on Saturday. There's not much football left to watch, guys. So the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl, which was yesterday, they're important. And we're going to talk about some future Chiefs, hopefully. And, nothing is a better representation of how important the draft is than the Chiefs 2022 draft class that is going to their third straight Super Bowl. Trent McDuffie, George Karlaftis, Jalen Watson. All those guys know is a Super Bowl appearance. They know nothing less, right? And that has set up this franchise for a whole nother window of competition that we never really thought existed. So the draft, it's super important. The Intangibles, our show, myself and Christian, as soon as the season ends, we're going to be locking in on draft and free agency, running through mock drafts, talking through prospects, talking through positions. We want to help you enjoy the draft as much as possible. The draft, it's like an investment. The more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. The draft is one of my favorite events of the year. I seriously enjoy it as much as the NFL playoffs. I'm weird like that, but seriously, the more you read, the more you learn about the players, the more you're going to enjoy it. Which also reminds me of another way to get more out of things, and that is Underdog Fantasy. Underdog, we've been working with them all year long, and you'd expect nothing less from them than a great setup for the big game next Sunday. You're going to be getting together with your friends, your family to have a party, right? You want to make that party even more fun with the Underdog app. Underdog is the best place to cash in on all your takes during the big game, which players are going off and which ones are ice cold. Make your entries in just a few taps. With their pick'em game, you could win up to $1,000 times your money just by choosing higher or lower on the player's stats, like yards, touchdowns, interceptions, and more. I just saw you can get Kareem Hunt for just 1 yard. If you think he's going to get 1 yard in this game, in the big game, you can add it to your entry and win over 325 times your money. Every dog deserves a second chance. With the Underdog Rescues, you can get your money back and receive a promo if an early injury causes you to lose a pick. My personal favorite in this big game. Look, I usually try to stay Chiefs-centric, but this one feels like free money. My personal favorite pick, Jalen Hurts over half a rushing TD. You know that's going to happen with the tush push at least, and he's been running the ball quite a bit too, even out of structure in a scrambler. So get in on the Underdog app and lock that in. Underdog is the best play to pick them. Download the app, sign up to use our promo code Arrowhead Addict. That's all one word to deposit to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. That's promo code Arrowhead Addict. Must be 18 years or older, 19 years or older in Colorado, and some games 21 years older in Massachusetts and Arizona. At present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.npcgambling.org. In Arizona, call the 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT-STEP to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 HOPE line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. Okay. So let's talk about this game here. I've already seen this comment here from Chiefs again in the chat, and it says, who's going to stop Saquon Barkley? And I feel like pretty much all analysis of this game is going to start here when it comes to the Super Bowl, which makes a lot of sense. He arguably could be an MVP candidate. We know that award is going to go to a quarterback, but when you look at the season that Saquon Barkley has had, it has really been an incredible season for running back. And, there's a lot of big conversations that happen about running backs and what are their value. I would like to bring up the fact that Saquon Barkley is a great example of two things. One, why you probably should never take a running back in the top 10, because need I remind you, the Eagles did not draft Saquon Barkley. The Giants did. He's not on the Giants, and the Giants stink. Now, there's a lot of reasons that the Giants stink. Saquon Barkley is not the sole reason why that franchise is where it is, but he's a symptom of the disease that is losing. And using premium picks like that, especially top 10 picks on a running back, it can get you in trouble. It's much different where the Chiefs pick towards the latter part of the rounds, but Saquon Barkley is also a great example of when running backs do matter. I know a lot of us like to sit around and say, oh, running backs don't matter. You can just plug them in. I think we're seeing this year in Kansas City, just like, we've had Isaiah Pacheco here the last couple of years. I think that he is not the healthiest version of himself right now, but we're seeing the difference in his skill set compared to Kareem Hunt. I feel like most people nowadays want to see Kareem Hunt get the lead carries in this backfield for the Chiefs. Saquon Barkley comes to the ultimate infrastructure for running back, a fantastic offensive line, a running quarterback that makes the zone read option a threat, and a good offensive coordinator. And oh, by the way, a great defense too. That also helps that running game. So the time of possession, all those stats, they really matter. but Saquon Barkley had to hit free agency for that to happen. So, really talented running back. Just to give you an idea, listen to what Saquon Barkley has done this year. 2,005 rush yards, 5.8 yards per rush. So he's getting almost halfway to the first down marker on every rush. 13 rushing touchdowns. Oh, and by the way, 278 yards receiving, 54 carries of 10 or more yards. Generally, when it comes to passing offenses, offense or defense, they usually consider any rush over 10 yards an explosive play and any passing play over 15 yards an explosive play. 54 times. This offense that the Eagles has basically just turned their explosive plays from run games. They're really the only team like that you can look at their run game and say, hey, them running the ball is almost as damaging as passing the ball. Now, we're going to sit here and say, how does Steve Spagnuolo try to attack this? Look, looking at the Eagles offense, there's just no way that Steve Spagnuolo is going to be able to take everything away. As much as I love Spags and as great of a game plan master that he is, we've seen this for him time and time again. These all-world offenses, you've got to pick and choose your poison a little bit. The Chiefs did this against the Bills a little bit last week, where guess what? I thought one of the most important stats from this game was Josh Allen carrying the ball 11 times for 35 yards, about 3.5 yards a carry. That's huge. He has killed them. That's the least amount of rushing yards he's had against them in quite some time. They shut down Josh Allen, the runner, in that game. Khalil Shakur had a few catches, but he really didn't kill him. Now, James Cook got his. And, guess what? Matt Collins had a big game. And it wasn't enough. I suspect Steve Spagnuolo will probably do something like that in this game. What I would like to point to is Saquon Barkley running the ball. The Chiefs have not had a running back go over 100 yards against them since the debacle, the Christmas nightmare that was the Raiders game. Not this Christmas, the previous Christmas. Zamir White, of all people, was the last running back to go over 100 yards against the Chiefs. Now, that stat's a little fluky because Lamar Jackson did rush for 125 yards against the Chiefs on the opening night of this season, but that's also a scramble and just a little bit different, right? So, is Saquon Barkley going to be the guy that ends this game for the Chiefs? Is this the weapon? I think in this game that Saquon Barkley's explosives are going to be limited. One of the things that I want to bring up is missed tackles. The Chiefs, when we were looking ahead to the AFC Championship game, they missed 11 tackles against the Buffalo Bills in that game up in Buffalo. They missed a single tackle last week against the Bills. The Chiefs are a good tackling team. Several years ago, this team started transitioning to a team of guys who make tackles. They got more athletic at the linebacker position with guys like Willie Gay, Nick Bolton, Leo Chanel. They went away from a player in Tyrann Mathieu who did turn over the ball at a high rate, but Justin Reid is one of the best tackling safeties in the game. They've got lots of guys who are great tacklers now. We just mentioned Leo Chanel. Jaden Hicks is a great tackler. Justin Reid's a great tackler. Brian Cook's a pretty good tackler. Their cornerbacks are good tacklers. They're going to try to limit the explosives of Saquon Barkley. And obviously they have to. Saquon Barkley is going to get his in this game. Do not be surprised if you look up and there's, 13 carries for 88 yards. But the big difference is he getting, 5 or 6 yards per carry, but he doesn't have that back-breaking run. To me, limiting explosive plays in the run game is going to be one of the biggest things here, is just shutting down that run game, hitting home runs. You saw that in the NFC Championship game. The Commanders matriculated their way down the field. They had to go for fourth down several times, 17 plays for 3 points. And guess what? The Eagles run one play, touchdown Saquon Barkley. And if you go back and look at that play, there was 2 or 3 guys that had the ability to cut off the lane that he took. And they tripped over themselves or they got blocked, and boom, that's where it goes. Now, there's also about 2 or 3 missed tackles on that play. If some of those guys are able to wrap up, it's a different story. One thing I wanted to point out about Saquon Barkley, too, this is an outside zone defense. This is going to put a lot of pressure on the defensive end. Saquon Barkley has 227 attempts of outside zone and just 177 gap runs. Now, obviously, that's a 2 to 3 ratio, but the biggest chunk of Saquon Barkley's yards has come off the ends with that outside zone. Over 1,200 of his yards this season have come either at left end or right end. So our defensive ends in this game, your Mike Danas, your Charles Omenihu, Felix Anudike-Uzomah, George Karlaftis, them holding up their end on the edge rush is going to be a very important part of this game, especially when you factor in where is the strength of the Eagles' offensive line. It's a tackle, especially right now. Jordan Mailata and Lane Johnson are some of the best tackles in the NFL, especially that tandem. The interior of the offensive line is a little banged up right now. Cam Jurgens did not play the previous game. Shout out Go Big Red for Cam Jurgens there, Nebraska player. He's their center, and he didn't play in that game. Landon Dickerson, who used to play center for Alabama, he came in and played center in that game, and he also got dinged up. Both of them were listed as a did not practice for the Eagles' last practice. That practice schedule, that practice report, it's a little weird right now because of the 2-week thing. I'll be interested as they get closer to the actual game how those guys goes, because AJ Brown didn't play with a non-injury practice. Devontae Smith didn't practice with a hamstring. That's obviously a big deal. And Cam Jurgens and Landon Dickerson didn't play. That would obviously change quite a bit about the Chiefs' game plan. The right guard, Mekhi Becton, a former tackle, a former number 10 overall pick of the New York Jets, he's moved inside. This is a huge, powerful offensive line. But the ends, the outside zone, the pursuit angles there, that's going to be really big, especially for the Chiefs linebackers. Now, one thing I did want to point out, one of the best performances that the Chiefs had against the run this year was against the Atlanta Falcons. Bijan Robinson is a back that has a similar skill set to Saquon Barkley. They ran a lot of outside zone. And in fact, that key play that the Chiefs stopped the Falcons on 4th down in that game was an outside zone play. So this might be an area where the Chiefs do well. Another team that utilizes quite a bit of outside zone because of its connection to the Andy Reid scheme was the Jaguars. The Chiefs have done a pretty good job of shutting down Travis Etienne the times that they faced the Jaguars in the playoffs and in the regular season. So that could be something that plays into the Chiefs' favor. I feel like a lot of the teams that have had more success, they're running gap and duo and man concepts in between the tackles, right? Especially when you think about where the strength of the Chiefs' defensive line is, it's more of those edges. Chris Jones plays out on the edge. Mike Pennell, Derek Nottie, Tershawn Wharton, those guys have played admirably at defensive tackle, but I wouldn't call that the strength, especially when you factor in like Tershawn Wharton. He's more of a pass rush first guy. So it's going to be up to the Chiefs playing their base personnel. I'd expect to see quite a bit of Leo Chanel in this game. If you think back to that 2022 Super Bowl, Leo Chanel had a great game in there. And obviously Nick Bolton did with scooping and scoring that touchdown. And honestly, what could have been 2 scoop and scores, depending on how you looked and broke down that play. So they're going to be matching the heavy run game of the Eagles with base personnel. So I'd expect to see lots of Leo Chanel, Nick Bolton, Drew Tranquill. Then the question is what are you doing at safety? Justin Reed can play down in the box. I expect Brian Cook will still be back there. That is a nightmare. If Saquon Barkley gets to the second level where he's breaking through their linebacking core and it's just Brian Cook to beat, that's one of the things that makes Saquon so dangerous is he's just a home run threat. When he gets loose, he's going to beat that single high safety if you're down playing like that. And don't forget, by the way, on the other side of the coin, you still have A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. I've kind of gone back and forth with some Chiefs fans on Twitter this week talking about the Eagles roster versus the Chiefs roster. And someone told me that they thought that the Eagles did not have as good of wide receivers as the Chiefs did. And while I will say, I think the overall depth of receiver is better for the Chiefs, we've got to be realistic about what the Eagles are running out at wide receiver. A.J. Brown is a true wide receiver 1. He has great yak ability. He is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL against man coverage, which, by the way, the Chiefs play man at one of the highest rates in the NFL. And then their second guy is the guy who won the Heisman, who is a fantastic route runner. Every season he's been in the NFL, he's at least had 800 yards. He's had 2 seasons over 1,000, and then his other season's 900. Devontae Smith is an incredible wide receiver, too. You've got Jahan Dotson in there. I don't expect him to be much of a threat. But again, going back to that Bills game plan, if Matt Collins is the guy that beats you, if Jahan Dotson's the guy that beats you, then be our guest. That's what it's talking about. And that goes back to kind of the Bill Belichick game plan. If I'm looking at this game, I'm thinking like Bill Belichick. Steve Spagnuolo, you put Trent McDuffie on Devontae Smith. First off, I feel like that's a better matchup for him. We saw A.J. Brown get the best of a rookie version of Trent McDuffie in the first Super Bowl. That game was a shootout. I wouldn't necessarily point to that game and say, hey, this is how we want to play on defense. You put best on their second best with Devontae Smith, Trent McDuffie. Then I'm bracketing A.J. Brown like they did Nico Collins. You're going to give him a tough day over there. Then you're playing heavy in the box with your 3 linebackers if you can. And then that just leaves 2 things. And to me, these are the 2 things. They're going to be the X factor in this playoff game, in this Super Bowl. It's going to be Dallas Goedert, and it's going to be Jalen Hurts' legs. Jalen Hurts, if you look at his passing charts and next-gen stats, does not throw over the middle of the field. Historically, that's where the Chiefs have struggled this year covering the tight ends. Even if you go back and watch the highlights from the last Super Bowl, a lot of the plays that were happening with Dallas Goedert were not over the middle of the field. The Chiefs know this, and I suspect that they will not turn a bunch of attention to there. I don't expect to see a bunch of zone-heavy coverage over the middle of the field. I don't expect to see Nick Bolton chasing after someone in coverage across the middle of the field, like you might see against some of these other teams that attack the middle of the field. The Bills are a team that does that. The 49ers are a team that does that. So, Jalen Hurts' legs. He has been a pretty dynamic runner all of his career. This year, he's got 630 rushing yards and 14 touchdowns. 14 rushing touchdowns. Where does most of that production come from? The touchdowns? It's the tush push. My Twitter handle shows up here underneath the video. Go take a look at the all 22 angles that I posted of the tush push. The Chiefs had a lot of success stopping the tush push last week against the Bills. Quite honestly, you could argue that was the difference in them winning or losing that game. The Eagles' brotherly shove, it's a different animal. First off, you can just look at the difference in how the offensive line lines up. The Bills' offensive line, they line up like a standard offensive line. You got 5 guys on the line of scrimmage who are basically square with their hips to the line of scrimmage. The Bills, or the Eagles, they make a wedge. Their offensive linemen are wedged in. So they're touching shoulder to shoulder, and their hips are pointed towards the ball almost. They talked about it. Tony Romo did a great job about how Josh Allen usually hesitates for a second, then goes behind the left guard. Jalen Hurts goes right behind the center. And this was their backup center, Landon Dickerson. Now, he played center at Alabama. He's got experience there, but this is not Jason Kelce, and it's not Cam Jurgens. It's Landon Dickerson. They still converted that almost every single time. They go right behind the center, and they actually do shove. They use that with Josh Allen, but they push Jalen Hurts across. And then the big difference is, too, is like Jalen Hurts is a freak as far as his lower core strength. So stopping that play, obviously, it's going to be huge. Honestly, if you're the Chiefs, I think you hope to stop it once, and you'd be thrilled with that. Hopefully, it's a high leverage moment. We saw Frankie Louvu of the Commanders just like try to hop over the line of scrimmage every time, and it's really all you can do. Maybe the Chiefs saw something there, but the notion that the Chiefs have the tush push sniffed out and that they can stop it 3 or 4 times in this game like they did last week, I think it's a different animal, and I think it's a little bit coy to think that. Jalen Hurts has a lot of productivity as a scrambler. He scrambled for a ton of big first downs in that Super Bowl last time the Chiefs played. Honestly, when I look at this game, you ask yourself a couple of questions. We've already asked the Saquon Barkley question. The next question you ask is, what version of Jalen Hurts is showing up in this game? The Chiefs have a lot of experience facing Kellen Moore. They faced him twice last year, and they had really good results against the Chargers last year. They held them to 17 points in Arrowhead with Justin Herbert. The last game of the season was Easton Stick. That was the game that Chris Jones was playing for a sack. Chiefs were resting their starters. That game, that you might throw that one out the window. But they've seen Kellen Moore quite a bit. They've also seen Vic Fangio a lot, who coached in Denver for quite some time. He coached against the Chiefs last year in the playoffs with the Dolphins, a very dinged-up Dolphins team. But what version of Jalen Hurts is showing up here? Going into the playoffs, he had not played well. There was a concussion that had sidelined him for a couple of weeks. In fact, the Commanders beat Kenny Pickett, who was starting for the Eagles the last time that they had faced them in the regular season. All that kind of changed in the NFC Championship game. Jalen Hurts probably played his best game of the year, or one of his best games of the year. You go down the passing log for Jalen Hurts, 180 yards, 170, maybe 202, 203. But they've really kind of, and I don't want to be derogatory to him, but they've kind of idiot-proofed this offense, where you ask Saquon Barkley to be Saquon Barkley, and then you ask Jalen Hurts to make high-percentage throws to elite weapons, Dallas Goedert, Devontae Smith, and A.J. Brown. Jalen Hurts, in his last 10 games, so from week 10 till now, has had 4 turnover-worthy throws via PFF. That's crazy. Josh Allen had 3 turnover-worthy throws in the game last week. Jalen Hurts isn't turning the ball over. And that type of play has worked for them, considering they play in the weaker NFC. They've got this awesome run game. But is he going to be able to do that ball control, ball security, basically just get the hand in the playmakers thing to against the Chiefs defense who tackles well? the yak options, they're not going to be there as much for the Eagles as they might be able to rely on against some of these bad defenses? Or do we get the Jalen Hurts that showed up in the 2022 Super Bowl? That version of Jalen Hurts went toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes. Now, I'm not sure how many times we've seen that version of Jalen Hurts since that game. He's had a lingering knee injury in this game, or this season as well in the playoffs. I don't know about that. 2 weeks off here, playing inside a dome rather than the cold Philadelphia field. We will see what version of Jalen Hurts show up. But if you limit him as a scrambler and make him throw from the pocket, I'm not going to be as stupid as to say he can't do it, because we've seen him do it. But I think it makes things harder on him, especially whenever we go back to the fact that the middle of the field is just not a place that they have a lot of success. So you're defending the outsides against A.J. Brown. One other thing I wanted to bring up here, and then we'll switch to the other side of the ball here, and then we'll get into some question and answer. So if you do have questions or comments about the game, pop them in here. The Chiefs, they play man coverage at one of the highest rates of the NFL. They are top 5 in that metric. The number 1 wide receiver in the NFL against man coverage, A.J. Brown. He has been one of the best at it in the NFL in his career. Part of that is you got a big body framed guy that you can have a player draped all over him and he's still going to win. So A.J. Brown's going to be a huge part of this offensive game plan, because the Chiefs, they're going to line up and play man coverage, especially when you factor in the amount of man coverage the Eagles have to see because of what they bring in the run game. Eagles offensive line is very good. I would expect both Landon Dickerson and Cam Jurgens to play in this game. Cam Jurgens was active against the Commanders and was honestly arguing with Landon Dickerson if he was going to go in or not. Dickerson was playing through a knee injury. I would expect both of those guys to go. You just don't see a lot of guys inactive for the Super Bowl. They'll fight through an injury. Whether it's to their benefit or dismay, they will probably fight through it. So that's when they have the ball. Oh, one other thing I want to point out. The Chiefs, we've been talking about their struggles against the tight ends for a long time. I was very nervous about the Bills tight ends and what they have to offer. They went 3 catches for 30 yards. Most famously, the catch that Dalton Kincaid did not make, but they went 3 for 30 against the Chiefs last week. Maybe the Chiefs are able to limit that. Maybe they choose to take away Dallas Goedert. I'm not sure. But I think that the Chiefs have some things cooked up against the tight end that might be able to help them in this game. Another thing I want to bring up, Jalen Hurts against the blitz. And look, this is pretty true of pretty much every quarterback. Every quarterback struggles when pressured. It's just more difficult. Now, some guys will really carve up the blitz. Jalen Hurts when blitz, he 151 attempts when blitz, 97 completions for a 64.2 completion percentage, and 8-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. But when he's blitzed, or when he's under pressure, but not blitz. So basically that means they're getting home with 4 and there's coverage. That's where the numbers really start to drop. 135 attempts, just 60 completions, a 44% completion percentage, 6 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. What does that say? If you can get home with 4, it really helps. Now it's going to be hard. We just talked about that offensive line is really good. So if the Chiefs can get home with 4, blitzing's a little bit tougher. Now, I do expect them to blitz in this game because it's Steve Spagnuolo and he's going to bring people, right? But we will see how that pressure breaks down, how that impacts Jalen Hurts. Again, I say you try to take away Saquon Barkley explosives, you try to limit Jalen Hurts, the rusher, and you shut down A.J. Brown. That's a really good start. And that's where you can see this game getting down to 22 points, 21 points. So make no bones about it. The Chiefs offense is going to have to score in this game. And you saw that urgency from Andy Reid. As we flip over to the other side of the ball, let's see here. We got a comment here from Bill Thompson. I did want to highlight, especially because we're talking about this a little bit. And what will the X factor be? Bill Thompson says, X factor would be special teams. If the Chiefs can get one dynamic play, that could be the difference between a win and a loss. I talked about this a little bit. The Eagles special teams, their coverage is pretty good. Their punter is pretty good. Their kicker, Jake Elliott, has not been good this year. He has really struggled, particularly from range. His percentage of completion goes down to of kicks made goes to about high 68, 69%, 40 yards plus. He goes to almost 50% or below with 50 yard, between 45 and 50, and he's made one kick from 50 plus all year. So if the Chiefs are dropping them back out of field goal range or in a long field goal range, Jake Elliott does not have accuracy this year. We saw some really big kicks be made in the Super Bowl last year, really long kicks. I think Harrison Butker and the 49ers kickers kind of like went back and forth about exchanging the longest field goal in Super Bowl history. We've seen Nico Remigio be a true wild card on the Chiefs special teams, both with kick returns and punt returns. There's a really nice clip of Travis Kelce challenging Nico Remigio to keep returning the ball and to make big plays. And he has, and he's had a big return in each game. The Eagles special teams coverage wise has been pretty good, but we weren't really talking about special teams whenever Kadarius Toney had a massive punt return. You go through every Chiefs Super Bowl run, special teams has been a key part of it. The Chiefs execute there at a high level. Something else that's came up quite a bit is blocked kicks, right? The Chiefs blocked a kick against the 49ers in the Super Bowl that ended up being huge. They blocked a kick against the Texans. So it will be interesting to see if Nico Remigio can break something big, or maybe it's a fake punt that the Chiefs are able to stop or something like that. But yes, Jake, the Chiefs, I would definitely say they have the advantage at kicker. I definitely say they have the advantage at returner. They use Cooper DeJean, who returned punts at Iowa last year. He's solid. Their main kick returner, Kenneth Gainwell's in concussion protocol right now. He's been fine. He hasn't like had a huge year or anything like that, but I think the Chiefs have the special teams advantage in this game. I would definitely lean towards them with the coaching as well. Dave Toub's a really experienced, really celebrated special teams coordinator. Let's see here. So from Jalen Butler, they have to stop Barkley, which I feel good about because the Chiefs have done this before with the game planning around a dynamic running back, Christian McCaffrey. I've heard this quite a bit, actually, that, Christian McCaffrey was that guy last year. And yeah, Christian McCaffrey had about as darn of a good year as Saquon Barkley had last year. I think Saquon's been a little bit more impressive as far as the total number of yards go. But yeah, you think back to that Super Bowl against the 49ers last year, you're thinking about guys that really broke the back of the Chiefs defense. It wasn't guys like George Kittle. It wasn't guys like Christian McCaffrey. It was more of the third and fourth wide receivers, right? We saw Brandon Ayuk get a few catches, but really it was their third wide receiver that really killed the Chiefs in that game. So they will have to pick their poison. Something else to remember about running backs is they can be schemed out of games, right? The Chiefs have historically kind of struggled in the first half of Super Bowls. Patrick Mahomes has I believe it's 74 quarterback rating in the first quarter of Super Bowls, which is really kind of odd because besides his first Super Bowl, he's gone into I guess not the second one against Tom Brady, but most Super Bowls that he plays in, he is the more experienced quarterback. You would think some of those nerves have settled down, but the Chiefs have started slow in most of their Super Bowls. They went right down the field and scored against the Eagles, but after that, they didn't really get a lot offensively. So this would be a game that if you can start out 7-0, 10-0 against the Eagles and start kind of game scripting Saquon Barkley out of the game, that's going to be a massive victory for the Chiefs. Because while Saquon Barkley is explosive, you can't just keep pounding the run if you're down 10. So that's something that I would like to see. And then, like the Chiefs have been battle tested. They've come back from large margins time and time again. The Eagles aren't quite that battle tested team. Maybe test their grit, test their wherewithal to see if how that team handles. Is Saquon or is AJ Brown over on the sideline reading self-help books if they're down 10 and Jalen Hurts is throwing a pick six? We will see. Bradford says the Niners didn't have the offensive line like an Eagles. Totally agree. The Niners offensive line was Trent Williams and a bunch of kind of okay guys. That was a huge impact in that game, right? We saw that Chris Jones pressure that turned into just a throwaway from Brock Purdy. He was untouched. This is probably a top 2 or 3 offensive line in the NFL. The Bills were one of those too. And, the Chiefs, they got to Josh Allen some, but Josh Allen is one of those guys that is so hard to sack, not just because of how elusive he is, but how strong he is at throwing the ball. Just like that final 4th and 5 play that we see, the Chiefs get 2 unblocked blitzers, which just doesn't happen in the NFL. He still finds a way to get the ball off. It doesn't count as a sack, but the pressures. As we talk about the Chiefs offense, that's something I want to talk about. The Eagles, we've talked a lot about how good their defensive line is. Jalen Carter is, on that Chris Jones trajectory. He's certainly not achieved at that level yet, but he's a guy that I think could be very quickly in the conversation for the best interior defensive lineman in the NFL. The Eagles, as a team, they rank 14th in sacks. Keep in mind, in that game in Arizona a couple of years ago, they had 70 sacks. They were first in the NFL by a long shot. This is a much different pass rush. They were winning consistently with 4. They had Hassan Reddick at the height of his powers. Brandon Graham might play in this game, might not, but he was a younger version of himself. They still had Fletcher Cox. Josh Sweat was a younger, healthier version of himself. This is a little bit different defensive line now. But something that's interesting. So they're 14th in sacks. However, they are 25th in pressures and 28th in blitz percentage. So they don't bring a lot of extra rushers. And they don't get a lot of pressure if they're not getting sacks. So the Chiefs are kind of the opposite. The Chiefs get a lot of pressure, a lot of quarterback hits. They don't convert them into sacks as much. There's some different philosophies on that. Some people believe that pressures are just as valuable as sacks. Some people believe pressures are more valuable than sacks because you can get them more often. The Eagles have done a pretty good job of converting their pressures into sacks because they are 14th. But who is the best at mitigating sacks in the NFL? Patrick Mahomes. So hopefully that's something that we see a game plan where the Chiefs can mitigate the pressure. We know what this key matchup is going to be when it comes to the Eagles defensive line and the Chiefs offensive line. It's going to be that left side. You've got Mike Caliendo, who's done an admirable job of stepping in at left guard. Where's Jalen Carter going to line up? 96% of Jalen Carter's defensive snaps have come head up over the right guard, which would be Trey Smith. Do they move him over to the left side? Probably. Look, I don't see a reason why they wouldn't. It's obviously what would make the most sense. I think the Chiefs, they probably go into this game plan knowing that Joe Thuney and Mike Caliendo are going to be the focus area of the defensive line here. They're going to have to shade help to that side of the line. I know that the question's already been asked. Do we think that DJ Humphries could potentially move in at left tackle and move your all-pro guard back in? That question's already been asked to Andy Reid. Andy Reid is very mischievous. He does not like to give clear-cut answers as much as possible. He's already been point blank and said, Joe Thuney is playing left tackle in this game. So we can put that notion to bed. So how are the Chiefs going to do this? The edge rushers of the Eagles. You've got Josh Sweat, who's a kind of a big, long, powerful guy. That's something that Joe Thuney struggled with a little bit more. You think about some of the games against Myles Garrett, against Will Anderson. That's a little bit more what Josh Sweat brings. He's not the caliber of player that those two guys are, but I do think that could bring some concern for a guy like Joe Thuney. Also, you've got a guard out there playing tackle. The movement skills aren't quite there. Then you've got Nolan Smith, a quick, bendy edge rusher who has really come on this year, especially late. 11 sacks this season. That is a guy that can run right by you. So I think protecting the edge is obviously going to be big. And then how do they control Jalen Carter? Pressure from the interior, we know it's just harder to control. And then they've got some really good run stuffers. Eagles have been a very good defense against the run. To that point, talking about what they've done, right? They are second in the NFL in EPA per dropback. They allow the fewest pass yards per game. They are top 5 in EPA per rush and top 10 in rush yards per allowed per game. So this defense is doing a lot of it with good linebacker play and coverage. Zach Bond, all-pro linebacker. He is the highest rated linebacker according to PFF, and it's not just running forward. He has got a really high coverage rate. I put something out on Twitter earlier this week about Oren Burks. Oren Burks holds potentially a significant spot in history for the Chiefs Kingdom. He was the linebacker who replaced Dre Greenlaw when he kind of freakishly tore his Achilles on the sideline. Oren Burks comes in. At halftime, Travis Kelce has 1 yard. In the second half of that Super Bowl, he has 92 yards. Oren Burks also was a part of the switch release that MVS scored a touchdown on. They put the microscope on Oren Burks, not just Travis Kelce, but some of the other players. He's playing next to a very good linebacker in Zach Bond, just like he played next to a very good linebacker in Fred Warner. So I expect them to try to, target Oren Burks. But the secondary, I've had some conversations with people about the secondary and who has the secondary advantage in this game. The Eagles have some really good players. Darius Slay is, on the other side of 30, but is still playing well. Quinyon Mitchell is a future All-Pro. He is excellent. Cooper DeJean is their slot corner. Another really good player. CJ Gardner-Johnson is back and is a good safety, and Reed Blankenship is there too. It's a pretty deep secondary, and they're doing most of this with coverage. Believe it or not, Vic Fangio, he was kind of the father of the bend but don't break defense, the 2 high shells, all that thing that became the rage where we're going to make your team manipulate your way down the field. This year, the Eagles rank top 5 in the NFL in percentage of one high shells played. So they're playing a lot more single high safety. I'm not necessarily sure why. I haven't dug into that, but I think it's because they trust their coverage. They're also playing a ton of man coverage because they've got dudes. Darius Slay was their best corner. We saw the Chiefs go after James Bradbury. We saw them go after Avonte Maddox, their slot corner in that game. Juju had a big game in that Super Bowl. I would look towards that again. Cooper DeJean is really good. He's a guy who's big enough to play safety, but they're making him in the slot, kind of like Shamari Connor. These are going to be the matchups that are really key. To me, using Xavier Worthy in that Joker role, where he's releasing out of the backfield, he's releasing off a jet sweep, that's going to be huge. And this might, it feels weird because DeAndre Hopkins has basically disappeared from this offense. This might be the game that DeAndre Hopkins makes the difference. I'm not calling for, 6 for 120 and a tutty from him or anything like that, but I think there could be 2 or 3 catches, particularly in the red zone, that he's going to matter because this coverage unit is sticky. They play a lot of man-to-man coverage. That's something that DeAndre Hopkins excels at, is beating man coverage and winning at the catch point. So I think that savvy veteran presence there, I think it could matter here. The other guy I'll bring up, Hollywood Brown. We saw the Chiefs come out on that opening drive, RPO the Bills to death with Hollywood Brown, and they did a little bit with Juju too. I think there's some opportunities here as well. Again, they're going to want to get the ball out quickly. So that's going to be a big part of this. Let's head to the chat here. If you have questions or things that you want to talk about the Super Bowl coming up here, or maybe you just want to share your hot take about the Super Bowl, something you think you might have, maybe you got something about New Orleans you love, feel free to share it. So Terry Bailey asked, what is the Eagles' biggest weakness? And I think this is a great question. You will hear a lot of analysis this season, this week. That is, the Eagles have the best 2 through 53 man roster in the NFL. The Chiefs just have the number 1 player in this game, and that's Patrick Mahomes. To me, I'm going to put it at 2 places. I'm going to put it at Jalen Hurts. I know that sounds weird because I do think he's had a good season, but this is not a quarterback who can put the team on his back and just go win. Again, I want you to kind of erase that Super Bowl from a couple years ago out of your head, just because this is a different game, a different season, different players. I'm going to say Jalen Hurts. And the other thing I'm going to say coaching. Nick Sirianni is a guy that it's the office space. What would you say you do here, Nick Sirianni? You've got Vic Fangio, a former head coach, one of the top defensive minds over the last couple of years running the defense. You've got Kellen Moore, a accomplished offensive coordinator who's been with the Cowboys, just finished working with Justin Herbert and the Chargers, and is probably going to take the Saints job the minute this Super Bowl is over. I don't feel great that Nick Sirianni is going to be able to rally this team to adjust, to do the things that they need to do to come back from a 10-0 deficit. What does it look like if things aren't going well on the sidelines? He's kind of a clown. I know a lot of people in Chiefs Kingdom do not love Nick Sirianni. The coaching is the weakness for the Eagles. I do think Vic Fangio is very good. We know Mahomes has had a lot of success. Oh, by the way, Vic Fangio was a consultant for the Eagles defense when they faced the Chiefs last time in the Super Bowl. He wasn't on the coaching staff, but he was helping with that. And like Kellen Moore, I think he's fine. I think he's brought some nice answers to this offense. Last year, the Eagles offense was just absolutely putrid towards the latter part of the year against the blitz. Jalen Hurts has improved against the blitz, giving him some nice answers. But I would say the coaching is definitely one of those. Like, this is like, you give Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes this roster, they're not losing a game. It's such a talented roster. Okay, let's see here. Going over this, Spags is another key. His scheme offers out of the game plan. I believe he did a good job in the first half with the Bills. Yeah, I totally agree, right? Like, this comes down to a couple things. We were just talking about coaching. We've seen Steve Spagnuolo author some of the best defensive game plans in NFL history. That's not hyperbole. He shut down the perfect Patriots team. That was Tom Brady at the height of his powers with Randy Moss. That was an incredible team, and he was able to shut it down. We've seen this with what he did to the Bills. I don't know if you've done any of the reading into this, but basically, just long short of it, all game when the Chiefs showed pressure, all season when they showed pressure, the blitz that Steve Spagnuolo brought would come from the weak side of the formation. So basically, you've got more players on the one side, that's the strong side. You got less players on the other side. You got a 1-by-3 or something like that. That's the weak side. The Chiefs would show pressure from the strong side and then bring it from the weak side. Basically, you in that scenario, on that 4th and 5, you have Justin Reed showing blitz at the line of scrimmage. Almost every time the Chiefs did that, Justin Reed would drop back into coverage. And then Spagnuolo's traditional trick is like, oh, we drop Justin Reed. This is simulated pressure back in coverage. Now I'm going to bring someone else. Well, in this instance, Steve Spagnuolo, like a good closer in baseball, reaches back and gets 99 gas here. He takes Justin Reed, puts him on the line of scrimmage, and they bring pressure from the strong side of the formation. They're already in a condensed formation, so you've got Justin Reed and Trent McDuffie, who come through virtually untouched. In fact, Trent McDuffie was at the podium and said Karlaftis got around his guy so quickly that Justin Reed and him were chasing that, like, Trent McDuffie kind of started slowing up in case something happened, because it's like, well, we don't need 3 guys chasing him. Steve Spagnuolo has got all the tools in the bag, and that is a decided advantage. Steve Spagnuolo versus Jalen Hurts, who, I'm not going to sit here and say that he's not bright or not smart or anything like that, but I don't think that he's one of those cerebral quarterbacks who can just make everything right. One of the biggest obstacles this year was not having Jason Kelce call out the protections at the center position, which is something that he did. So, Steve Spagnuolo, in Spags we trust, right? Like, this is the time to break off those shirts with the amount of offensive weapons that the Eagles are going to bring. We are an all-around team. The Chiefs aren't a dynasty for nothing and will come and show to the Super Bowl. I pointed this out last year against the 49ers. The 49ers obviously had recently been in the Super Bowl and faced the Chiefs. Even with that Super Bowl that the 49ers played in 2019, the Chiefs had a decided advantage as far as experience in the Super Bowl. I'll have to dig into the numbers and see how many Super Bowl appearances and championships are on the Eagles' active roster right now. It's not many. They've turned over a lot of that roster since the last time they've played. Just think about the defensive line. Fletcher Cox was on that team. Now he's not. Javon Hargrave was on that team. Now he's not. There's a lot. Hassan Reddick, James Bradbury. I mean, we can just go down the list. There's a lot of guys who were on that Eagles team just a couple of years ago who played and lost in the Super Bowl, and they're not on the team anymore. Versus you've got almost every player on the Chiefs roster who has played in a Super Bowl. There's a few guys, right? Kareem Hunt, DeAndre Hopkins, the rookies. The only rookies they're going to play in this game are Xavier Worthy and Jaden Hicks. That this is their first Super Bowl. But at some point, you have to feel like the Chiefs' Dynasty DNA, it kicks in here. They know how to handle this. The media week, you will listen to players who have played in a Super Bowl. They will talk about that this week is strenuous. When they leave Kansas City and arrive on Sunday down in New Orleans, that game plan is already set. They'll probably add maybe 5 to 10% more to the game plan in New Orleans, but the rest of the time that they're there, they're going to do more media availability this week than some of those guys do the full year. So it's a week of handling adversity. No one handles that better than Andy Reid. We know his record coming off of a bye. Patrick Mahomes has only lost 2 games coming off a bye in his career. Ironically, one of them was the Super Bowl to the Bills, or not to the Bills, excuse me, the Bucks. There's a lot of things we could go down the rabbit hole of what happened there and why that happened. We don't need to. And then the other was against the Eagles last year, where MVS had the game-winning catch in his hands, or at least a game-tying catch, couldn't make it. But historically, the Chiefs have done really well in this separation, in this situation. So that Dynasty DNA, it's going to come really, really clutch in this game, I would think. 2.76 average time to throw. That's not a long time to get pressure. I'm assuming that he's meaning for the Chiefs. And yeah, the Chiefs game plan has been centered around getting the ball out quickly. They've done a nice job of adjusting to the Patrick Mahomes, Joe Tooney combination there. But in the same breath, that limits some of the things. I've seen a lot of people that have talked about, where has DeAndre Hopkins gone in this offense? DeAndre Hopkins is not a quick separator, right? The guys who have been getting fed in this offense recently, you had Travis Kelce against the Texans, and you've got Xavier Worthy. I know on the Hey K Adams show, they did a nice breakdown of Xavier Worthy with Matt Hamilton, and he kind of talks about how all the different places that Xavier Worthy lines up in the formation and how different they can make the look by what Xavier Worthy does. I think Xavier Worthy is going to be huge in this game because those quick answers, that 2.76 time to throw, it's going to be important. And yeah, like, Jalen Carter, he's coming from the interior. He's got to get home in less than 3 seconds. That's huge. So be interesting to see how they kind of mitigate that pressure with other things other than just time to throw. The Eagles defense isn't going to be able to cover all the guys at once, and we're more dangerous now than we were when we beat them the first time. Plus, now we're better defensively. I do think that brings up a good point. how are these teams stacked up to one another? How does the Eagles offense compare to what they were a few years ago? I'm going to say this is a better version of the Eagles offense because Saquon Barkley. The Eagles offensive line a few years ago was better. You had Jason Kelsey, Isaac Selamalo, who's now on the Steelers, Mailata, and Lane Johnson were still there. Landon Dickerson was there. This is a better Eagles offensive line overall, or offense altogether, though, because of what they've added in Saquon Barkley. I also think like Jahan Dotson's a great third option from the slot. He hasn't really done much this year, but he's a little bit better option than what they were running now. I think it was Zacchaeus that they were eliminated. Zacchaeus, who was right on the slot at that point for them. And you've just got a little bit more experience from Jalen Hurts. Defensively for the Eagles, this is a much better unit. I know that the Eagles defense was like the number one defense ranked going into that Super Bowl, but I think it was pretty easy to see. You rolled over what that defense had done throughout the year. It was a paper tiger. I don't feel that way about this Eagles defense. They faced some real team. They faced the Ravens. They faced a really good Rams offense. They faced a very good Commanders offense, and they scored 55. So I feel better about the Eagles as far as where they are. I think this is a better version of this team. And frankly, I think this is a better version of the Chiefs. I think the Chiefs offense is a little bit less dominant than it was. You have to remember that year that Patrick Mahomes won the MVP, the Chiefs offense was one of the best offenses in the NFL, if not the best. They had better pass protection. Orlando Brown and Andrew Wiley were playing well. Their interior offensive line was set. They had Tooney, Creed, and Trey. Juju Smith-Schuster was a better version of himself. They had MVS. Honestly, you go back to that season, you want to talk about like Patrick Mahomes and why he's great and why he deserves all the accolades that he gets. Look at that season. He won MVP, and his receivers were Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore, Juju Smith-Schuster, MVS, and his starting running back was Isaiah Pacheco. Jerick McKinnon really turned it on that season. He was huge that season. But I mean, that is not a cast that you're sitting there looking at like, wow, this is an all-star crew, right? And they were still able to win a Super Bowl, be the number one offense in the NFL. So while I do think that the Chiefs' depth at wide receiver will challenge them, and I do think this is kind of a everyone eats situation with Kelsey, I think that the Chiefs offense here is a little bit worse than it was in 2022, but decidedly the Chiefs defense is better. That defense, famously Danny Heifetz, who works for the Ringer, he does the Ringer Fantasy Football Show. Excellent podcast if you get a chance to check it out. It's not just fantasy football, it's really just football in general. It's hilarious. But he covered that Super Bowl and was in the locker room, and he's never said the player. But there was a Chiefs player whenever they were celebrating in the locker room that went up to another corner, so they were both corners, and said, "I cannot believe we just won the Super Bowl and we have no idea how to play this defense." That they were a bunch of young pups, right? Jalen Watson, Joshua Williams, and Trent McDuffie, they were just getting going in this offense. Yes, they had L'Jarius Sneed, but they were really kind of doing this all with a bunch of new guys. The defense is much better. The pass rush is better, I think, too. You had to remember, like, they were still relying on Frank Clark back then. Charles Omenihu, he was a better player. You still got Chris Jones. George Karlaftis is a better player. And I think the linebacker play is better with Drew Tranquill in the mix versus Willie Gay. So I think it's really kind of a push. I think both teams are probably a better version of themselves than they were, especially with the Chiefs' experience and how good they've gotten at losing or winning these tight, one-score games. So it's really tight. Eagles struggle with coverage in the flats. Kelsey, Gray, and even Pirine could be a huge key. I do think that rallying to the ball and making tackles and not testing, we talked about them playing one high quite a bit, that the Eagles defense likes to play one high. I think that this is one of those games that you maybe do try to stretch the field a little bit. You try an Xavier Worthy shot, you try a Justin Watson shot or a Hollywood Brown or something like that, something to let them know like, hey, you can't just sit in one high shell, because I do think that they will try to do that. But to your point, they do play quite a bit of off coverage. They play man at a high rate, but that leaves those passes in the flat, that leaves some separation for those linebackers or those guys coming off the edge. So I've always been a proponent of Samaje Perine, seeing a little bit more Perine. I think we'll still see some Pacheco. I know we will see some Kareem Hunt in this game, but I wouldn't mind seeing them use Samaje Perine in this game as more of a passing weapon. Maybe this is a good game to get the screen game going again. The Chiefs have not been a huge screen team this year. Historically, that's been one of Andy Reid's calling cards. Wouldn't mind seeing a little bit more screen action in this game, not just to the wide receivers too, right? Like that was a huge part of what they did with Rashee Rice last year. I think that we saw a moderately healthy version of Juju Smith-Schuster. He's like the Toby Keith song. I ain't as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was. Maybe you can use Juju Smith-Schuster a little bit like Rashee Rice. Both those completions he had broken tackles. Maybe that's something you can use. Obviously, he's not going to have the explosiveness of Rashee Rice, but you can maybe use him in some of those situations. Let's see here. I'm not sure. Like, I want to look here real quick what the Eagles' run defense has been like. It's been pretty good. Top 5 in EPA per rush, top 10 in rush yards allowed per game. It's going to be tough getting Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco going in this game. To me, one of the biggest areas that's just going to stand out in this game is going to be the red zone. It always is, but if you're the Chiefs and you can keep the Eagles in long and goal situations, because let's be real, with the Eagles, if they're getting to third and second and goal, and they're at the 2 or 3 yard line, they're going to get in because they've got Saquon Barkley, because they've got the brotherly shove. And they're aggressive, right? They're going to use all 4 downs. So winning in the red zone on early downs, particularly, like keeping them at 9 and goal to go and 10 and goal to go, or getting a sack, that's going to be key. And then for the Chiefs, right? When they're down there, they're going to have to score. The threes are not going to beat the Eagles. So that's why I think like the DeAndre Hopkins element could be big. We've seen him still predominantly be a red zone player. Travis Kelce, they're going to have to do that. And we've seen Andy Reid, it's almost like I've already seen people asking, what's the fun play this year? Is it Wasp? Is it Corn Dog? Is it Tom and Jerry? What are all these plays that the Chiefs have? So you feel like Andy Reid hopefully has something in the bag that he can pull out here. It'd be kind of hilarious if they were able to use that jet action again, that return motion that they use so wisely against. I feel like if you're the Eagles and if that clowns you again, or also they kind of used a similar motion against the 49ers. If you're the Eagles and you let that happen to you again, like you've already lost. You kind of deserve to lose that game, right? Because they have shown that a lot. And Joshua Zylstra, he brings something up here that I do think is kind of a good point. There's a lot of youth in that secondary, right? You've got Andy Reid. They haven't really played an Andy Reid offense all season. I don't believe that they've played the Jaguars who run that same scheme. Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, both rookies. DeJean also didn't start getting going until later in the year due to injury. Maybe that's something that like we can get a couple of gotcha moments. Andy Reid is obviously a fantastic offensive mind. Maybe that's something that they're able to take advantage of in this game. Real quickly before we get out of here, I'm going to take a drink because I'm very thirsty and my mouth is very dry. Okay, real quickly before we get out of here, I want to talk a little bit about some of the names that we saw at Shrine Bowl and Senior Bowl. If you do not know, I do a ton of the draft coverage here for Arrowhead Addict. I've been keeping a close eye on the Senior Bowl practices and the Shrine Bowl practices. There's just a couple of names I wanted to highlight. I also think it's important for you guys as Chiefs fans to know what the impact that some of these players have that will be going before the Chiefs. Quarterback wise, right? Like quarterbacks, they dominate the draft. This is not a strong quarterback draft. I think Cam Ward and Shadur Sanders are probably going to go in the first round, probably in the top 10, 15 picks. I do think that there's still a lasting question as, is there another quarterback? Are the traits of Jalen Milroe out of Alabama, a guy who can run the ball like Anthony Richardson? He's faster, like honestly, has that upside of a Jaden Daniels, of a Lamar Jackson, has a big arm, but has accuracy and turnover issues. Does he sneak up in there? There's been some hype around Jackson Dart, the quarterback from Ole Miss, who's had a couple of good practices down at the Senior Bowl. Keep in mind, when it comes to the Chiefs, anytime there's a first-round quarterback, that's a win, right? We always talk about that in the draft because that's just bumping good premium talent down another rung, making it easier for the Chiefs. This year, the Chiefs are able to grab a player like Xavier Worthy because there's 5 quarterbacks taken in the first round. So a couple of names I want to run over here that had a really nice Shrine Bowl. A guy I want to bring up, shameless, Nash Hutchmaker, interior defensive lineman from Nebraska, was out at Shrine Bowl. This is a guy who was a state championship wrestler, even wrestled for the Cornhuskers in college. He is a big, powerful run defender. He's probably going to be predominantly a nose tackle or a defensive tackle. He wins with leverage and power. He is freakishly strong, country strong, and was pretty productive sacking the quarterback last year. This year, he dealt with some injuries that were nagging, but really had a pretty good Shrine Bowl. Really was showing up against some of the interior defensive linemen, offensive linemen well. And I think that this is a guy that can be a day 3 game changer along the defensive interior line. Ricky White, wide receiver from UNLV. I like this guy. Got a lot of speed, got a lot of skills that would kind of profile similar to like a Justin Watson. I think that the Chiefs could be in a market for that type of guy. This is kind of their do-it-all wide receiver. We're seeing Juju Smith-Schuster and Justin Watson take quite a few snaps in this offense. Another name I'll bring up, he wasn't at Senior Bowl, but Alec Manor, the wide receivers from Stanford. He is another guy who is kind of a dirty work wide receiver. Both these guys have the skill set to stretch the field, but they're also quality run blockers, and I think can find the field pretty quickly as a third wide receiver that can catch the ball, do some nice things down the field, but also plus blockers win at the catch point. Ricky White had a nice Shrine Bowl. Another guy I want to bring up, this is a really, really, really rich running back talent class. There's some guys that are going to go day 1, most likely Ashton Genty. I do think we could see another guy sneak in like Caleb Johnson out of Iowa, Omarion Hampton, running back from North Carolina. And then I think you will see a record number of running backs taken on day 2. Travion Henderson, Quinshawn Judkins, guys like that. There's a lot of really talented running backs. Cam Scatterby, the running back out of Arizona State. You saw what he could do in the college football playoff. But I want to talk about a day 3 running back here that might be available that honestly has a lot of similar traits to an Isaiah Pacheco, and that's Rocket Raheem Sanders. He is with Arkansas now. He's with South Carolina now, was at Arkansas. This guy is not a ton of production in the passing game, but they call him Rocket for a reason. He's a one-cut runner, has a pretty good power profile, does really well with gap and duo, but does have the outside zone speed. He's a guy that I could see the Chiefs being interested in. Another name I'll throw in there is Trevor Etienne, the brother of Travis Etienne, the running back for the Jaguars. He played on that Georgia team, played with Florida last year. Another guy that really profiles as a nice outside zone scheme option for the Chiefs who want to bring that back. I think that's been one of the bigger pluses of having Kareem Hunt, even with his lack of speed and burst. He still brought that outside zone ability to the Chiefs offense. I think that that's something that they're going to want to bring back. And I would not be surprised if Rocket Sanders is a guy who's brought in here to compete with Isaiah Pacheco, or, like I said, a Trevor Etienne who can run the outside zone thing, been pretty productive in the pass game as well. You Jayhawk fans will like this next name, Kobe Bryant, slot corner at Shrine Bowl, a baller, a guy who just makes plays. A little bit undersized, doesn't profile as the traditional Steve Spagnuolo corner who is long and lean. But this is a guy who is fiery in the run game, comes up and plays the ball well, and has a knack for generating turnovers. He was a big turnover guy for KU this year. He's a guy that every time I just watch a KU game or I watch KU on tape, he just pops. This is a guy that I want on the team. We've seen some of these kind of fiery slot corners really make a big difference. I also think like Kobe Bryant, you bring him in, you can get Shamari Connor out of the slot, who I think is a guy that people have frequently attacked. You still have that option with Trent McDuffie as well too. But I think we've seen that these hybrid slot defenders, they can really make a difference. And I've liked what I've seen from Kobe Bryant. Heading over to the Senior Bowl, probably one of the biggest winners of the Senior Bowl is a guy named Gray Zabel. He's a tackle from North Dakota State, but he's going to be playing interior offensive line at the next level. He had a hell of a first day of practice, was the talk of practice. He's a guy who's got great movement skills, a lot like Cody Mauch, who is now a guard for the Buccaneers. But you want to tell me that the Chiefs are sitting at 32, they take Gray Zabel, and he's just your starting right guard? That's a great pick. And this is a guy who moves like a tackle. He's going to be great for movement skills on screens, outside zone, really anchors well. Some of the most powerful guys at the Senior Bowl were not moving Gray Zabel. He's really just able to sit down on those power rushes, really nice mirroring skills. Does not have the length to play tackle. So if you're in your mock draft simulator, you see him, he's not going to be a tackle for the Chiefs. But I do like him at the interior level. Another guy I want to bring up, Xavier Restrepo, slot wide receiver from Miami. This is a guy who's built more like a running back. Honestly, kind of a little Puka Nacua-ish. Really good after the catch, solid route runner. He's not going to, win down the field or win at the catch point like you're used to. But you want to talk about, the Chiefs should have taken Ladd McConkey. Well, they can do that. They can fix that with an Emeka Buka. from Ohio State is another name I'll bring up there. Whether this is like a premium route runner from the slot. Xavier Restrepo is another guy. When I think about Chiefs wide receivers, I think about guys who can separate and guys who can win after the catch. Restrepo has both of those things. So I like him a lot. He's a fifth-year guy. A lot of times the Chiefs don't draft older prospects until day 3. I think Restrepo would be a day 2 guy, but we've also seen a lot of these older guys come in and really produce. Like I was kind of out on Braden Fisk last year. I didn't think the Chiefs would take Braden Fisk because of his age. He's balling out. So maybe the Chiefs try to change that a little bit. Jalen Noel, wide receiver from Iowa State. This is a guy who honestly reminds me a lot of some of the Chiefs wide receivers. Separation skills, speed down the field, nice ability after the catch, a little bit slighter built, more of a 5'11", 190 build rather than that like 6'2", 6'3", 220 wide receiver build that other teams crave. He reminds me of Jaden Reed, who was a guy that I pounded the table for the Chiefs to take, who's been a really good Packer. And it's not just because of the kind of like shiftiness in the slot ability. I think he's better at the catch point than he gets credit for. This is another guy that I can see the Chiefs, they've kind of gone back to the well frequently with the day 2 wide receiver. They've got an extra day 2 pick. Jalen Noel, come on down. I think that they're just going to keep stacking these day 2 wide receivers. A couple more guys to get to. Anthony Benton, wide receiver, tackle from NC State. Honestly, his build kind of reminds me of a Orlando Brown. I don't think he's as big as Orlando Brown. I think he's 6'5", 345, came in with over 34-inch arms. That's that important mark. Anytime you talk about a tackle, the Chiefs have never drafted a tackle and started them at tackle that had sub 34-inch arms. Kingsley Suamataia had like 34 and a fourth, I believe. But he's a guy who's really kind of come on late at Senior Bowl practice. He's a guy that I think could go into that day 2 project tackle spot. I'd be surprised if he was a first round pick. But if you're the Chiefs and you keep looking for your tackle of the future, what is that answer going to be? I'm here to tell you, mock drafts, guys, they are not shopping list. Eggs, bread, milk, cheese, tackle, running back, wide receiver. You don't just cross off your needs. The Chiefs shouldn't just take a tackle because they need a tackle. That's bad process because you're going to end up reaching for a player that might not be that good. Now, if the Chiefs think that Anthony Belton can be a good player, then maybe they bring him in here and compete at left tackle with the Suamataia, with Wanya Morris, and they just have this kind of project tackle battle. But he is a guy that I think has requisite length. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Patrick Paul last year, who was taken in the second round, started at left tackle for parts of the year for the Miami Dolphins. A little bit more experience for Paul, who played for, I believe he was either a 4th or a 5th year player. But that's another project tackle that I think could kind of hit some of the marks that the Chiefs look for. Last couple of guys I'll give you here before we get out. These are actually guys that I want to talk about that probably won't impact the Chiefs. Mike Green from Marshall. Huge Senior Bowl performance. His stock is rising. I think it's going to be a first-round pick. Don't mock him to the Chiefs. Okay, this is a Joshua Uche type build type of guy. I just don't see the Chiefs drafting this player. Great player. Was putting some big guys on their ass this week. But I don't see him being a fit for the Chiefs. As much as you might like what you've seen from him, I've never been more out on the smaller, shifty, bendy edge rusher for the Chiefs. Just seeing what they've done with Felix Anudike-Uzomah, who kind of profiled as that, not quite like a Mike Green or a Nolan Smith or a Joshua Uche, but the Chiefs traded for Joshua Uche so they could put him on the bench. I don't think that Mike Green is going to be an option there. Also, by the way, James Pierce Jr., edge rusher from Tennessee, same thing. Bendy, smaller edge rusher who wins with speed, doesn't set the edge particularly well. I think Mike Green's going to be a good player, but it won't be red and gold. Last guy I wanted to bring up who had a great Senior Bowl, left early, Shamar Stewart. He's the edge/interior defensive lineman from Texas A&M. Had a great process. I think this guy's going to be a top 10, top 15 pick. Just making, like, he's running around tackles and getting strip sacks and drills when you're not allowed to tackle the quarterback, which means he's beating the quarterback so badly that he's able to just kind of reach around and bat the ball to the quarterback's hand. Another guy who had a big Senior Bowl last year, if you remember the Senior Bowl, Darius Robinson, a Mizzou guy, a local guy here. He was kind of off the radar, had a great Senior Bowl, ended up being a first-round pick. So we see the rises for these guys. So these are some guys that I just wanted to bring up and talk about as far as the process goes. We will write this up. We'll be covering the draft here, but those are some Senior Bowl names that I think could be Chiefs relevant. we're heading up to the Super Bowl, guys. It's coming. We're, just over a week out. It is a Red Friday. Make sure you are got your notification set up here for Arrowhead Addict. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We're going to have lots of really cool content coming to you live from Radio Row, from New Orleans. Our guy Patrick Allen, our guy Sterling Holmes are going to be down there working with the Special Olympics and talking to some of the biggest names in NFL and NFL media. So there's not a better place to be next week than here at Arrowhead Addict. And make sure to check out all of our written content as well. Thank you so much for joining me for this kind of unabridged, different version of the Intangibles without my co-host. Thank you for not roasting me in the chat, for telling me that I'm doing a bad job as a one-man show. I did my best. If you think I did a bad job, just don't tell me, please. Guys, seriously though, thanks so much for joining me. It's the Super Bowl. Next time I will be talking to you will be halftime of the Super Bowl. I'll be doing the halftime show and post-game. Hopefully it's an epic post-game celebration. That's what we're all hoping for. And I'll be talking to you during the halftime show. If you're one of those people who doesn't like the halftime show, come join me. We probably won't go the full halftime, but we'll go 15 minutes, talk about the game and all the big matchups and what's to come in that second half. Thank you so much for joining me today. And as always, here from Arrowhead Addict, it is Go Chiefs.